The conference room smelled like recycled air and carpet cleaner. My mother was seated across the table from me, next to her attorney, wearing the pale blue dress she kept for important occasions. She looked at me the way she had looked at me my whole life, like I was a problem to be managed. She was about to find out how wrong that was. Let me take you back to where this started. My name is Claire Atchison. I was 31 years old, and I was a paramedic with Forsyth County Emergency Medical Services in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I had been working that unit for 6 years by the time any of this started, running 48-hour rotations, sometimes two back-to-back when the schedule fell apart. My supervisor, Marcus Webb, who had 22 years in emergency medicine, told me once that I was the steadiest person he had worked alongside. He meant it as a compliment. I think about that a lot now. Steady people make good targets. We do not panic, which means we also do not always notice when we should. I grew up in Kernersville, about 20 minutes east of Winston-Salem. My father, Doug, ran a landscaping company. My mother, Patricia, managed the front office at a dental practice for most of my childhood. My younger sister, Brooke, was 4 years behind me, and from the time she could form sentences, she was the daughter my parents organized their lives around. Brooke was the one with the pageant photos on the mantel, the one whose college tuition came before any discussion about money, the one my mother introduced at parties with a full biography while I stood nearby and smiled. I was not bitter about that, or at least I was not then. I loved Brooke. She could be funny and impulsively generous in small ways. The problem was never Brooke. The problem was what my parents had built around her. I had been financially independent since I was 19. I paid my own tuition through a combination of student loans and overnight shifts at a pharmacy chain. I earned my EMT certification, then my paramedic license. I signed my own leases. By 31, I had a credit score of 742 and a savings account I had built $20 at a time over the better part of a decade. There was a blue ceramic mug on my kitchen counter that I had bought myself the day I passed my paramedic boards. It was not special to look at. I bought it because I wanted something in my apartment that I had chosen for no reason other than that I liked it. I drank my coffee out of it every morning before shift. That mug was the most purely mine thing I owned. The one thing that made me vulnerable was this. I trusted my family, not blindly. I was not naive. But I believed that the people who shared my last name operated by the same basic code I did. You do not use people. You do not take what is not yours. I assumed that because it was how I had always operated. It genuinely did not occur to me that someone could look at me, say they loved me, and be lying. I had no reason to think anything was wrong. That was the problem. Brooke got engaged in the spring of 2021. His name was Carter Wills, and he came from established money in Charlotte. His family had a lake house that was larger than most people's primary residences. Carter was polite in the practiced way of people who have been trained to be gracious without being warm. He loved Brooke, I think, in the way some people love the particular version of a person they have selected. My mother called me at 6 in the morning the day after the engagement. She was already talking about venues. She mentioned a figure. I asked her to repeat it. She said the Wills family had certain expectations for the reception and that the event would need to reflect both families appropriately. I was sitting on the edge of my bed in my scrubs after a night shift. I thought, Brooke and Carter have not been together 2 years yet. I did not say that. I said congratulations and that I would call Brooke later, and I went to sleep. Over the following months, the wedding planning consumed my family, the way large events consume families that have been waiting for something to give them a shared purpose. My mother started a binder, then a spreadsheet. She drove to Charlotte 4 hours each way, multiple times a month, to attend planning meetings with Brooke. She called me after each one with updates. I listened. I was working 3 shifts a week, sometimes 4. I was present in the way you are present when you love someone, but cannot afford to be fully inside everything happening around them. In October of 2021, I drove to my parents' house for a Sunday dinner. My father had made pot roast. The kitchen smelled like it. The table had wedding samples spread across one end, fabric swatches and caterer brochures, and I moved a small stack of them aside to set down my glass of water. My mother watched me move them with an expression I did not know how to name at the time. After dinner, Brooke and I sat on the porch the way we used to when we were kids. She asked about my work. I told her about a 9-year-old I had run a call on that week. Severe asthma, bad outcome, prevented by about 40 seconds of good luck and correct sequencing. She listened with her chin in her hand and said, "I do not know how you do it." I said, "You just do it." She nodded. She seemed almost wistful about something. I noticed things I did not register properly. My mother asked me once to confirm my current mailing address, saying she was updating her address book. I gave it to her. Another time, she asked if I still had the same email. I said yes. I thought she was being scatterbrained, which was not unusual for her under stress. I also noticed, at that October dinner, a manila folder on the kitchen counter with my name written on the tab in her handwriting. I asked what it was. She said it was old paperwork she was organizing. I did not ask again. I found out later that while I was driving home from that dinner, she was already on the phone with the wedding planner. I found out what had been done to me on a Tuesday morning in March of 2022. It was 8 weeks before Brooke's wedding was scheduled to take place. I had been trying to buy a house. I had a tentative pre-approval, and I was meeting with a loan officer named Dale Renfrew at my bank to move the process forward. I sat across from him with a folder of pay stubs, savings records, everything organized the way I organize things. He pulled up my credit file. I watched his face change. He was quiet for a moment. He cleared his throat and said, quote 1. I asked him what he meant. He turned the screen so I could see. My hands went cold. Not from the temperature, just cold. 14 open accounts, listed under my name and social security number. Credit cards. Vendor lines of credit. 3 installment loans. A contract with a catering company in Charlotte. A furniture rental account. The total outstanding balance across all of them read as $3,840,000. I read the number 3 times. I said out loud, quote, 2. Dale Renfrew looked at me with the careful expression of someone who had heard exactly that sentence before. He told me he would advise me to contact a consumer attorney and each creditor directly. He printed a sheet about fraud reporting through the 3 major credit bureaus and slid it across the desk. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot for 12 minutes. I know it was 12 minutes because I checked my phone when I got in and again when I started the engine. In those 12 minutes, I did not cry. I went through every account I had ever opened, every card, every loan. I thought about the address confirmation, the email confirmation, the folder with my name on the tab. I knew. I called my mother at 9:47 in the morning. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she had not been surprised to hear from me. I said, quote 3. There was a pause. She said she did not know what I was talking about. I said her name once. The way I say a patient's name when I need them to stop talking and pay attention. She went quiet. Then she said, Claire, we needed a guarantor. The vendors required someone with an established credit history. We were going to pay all of it ourselves. Carter's family was going to reimburse the reception costs. It was only ever supposed to be temporary. I want you to sit with that for a moment. We needed a guarantor. As if my credit score, 7 years of deliberate and careful financial building, was a shared family resource that could be borrowed without asking. As if intent to repay made the forged signatures something other than what they were. I said, You forged my signature on contracts without telling me. She said, We signed your name, but it was for the family. Those were her exact words. Signed your name. For the family. I filed that sentence away somewhere very specific in my mind, where I keep things I am going to need later. I asked her to send me a complete list of every account and every vendor. She said she would need to talk to my father first. I said that was fine and hung up. That was the first layer. Then I started pulling the documents myself. It took 3 days of phone calls to compile the full picture, and what I found spread across my kitchen table on a Thursday night was worse than what Dale Renfrew's screen had shown me. The catering contract alone was for $1,100,000. The floral design company was contracted for $260,000. A lighting and sound company, a tent company, a custom cake from a boutique bakery in New York, a luxury car service for the wedding party and all out-of-town guests, and then 5 credit cards opened in my name to cover overflow costs when individual vendor contracts exceeded what my mother had projected. None of those cards had been sent to my address in Winston-Salem. Every one of them had been sent to my parents' house in Kernersville. They had used my social security number, my date of birth, my correct salary from Forsyth County, and a different mailing address on every single application. When the statements arrived, they went to Kernersville, not to me. I had been completely blind to it for almost a year. I sat at that table for a long time. The radiator clicked. The upstairs neighbor's dog walked back and forth across the floor above me. I remember looking at the blue mug on my counter, sitting right where I had left it that morning, and thinking about how ordinary my kitchen looked given what I was reading. They had no idea what they had just done, and I was going to let them keep not knowing, for a while. Now I want to be straight with you about where I was at that point. I was not thinking about revenge. I was not even thinking about the money yet. Not in the way you might expect. I was thinking about my name. About the fact that my name, which is attached to every certificate and contract and lease I have ever signed, had been used without my knowledge or consent to absorb nearly $4 million in debt. And the people who did it thought a phone call and the phrase quote _7 _ was going to be the end of the conversation. I want you to stay with me here, because what I found next, in the middle of gathering what I already thought I understood, changed the entire picture. And I mean that in a very specific, very documented way. The first call I made was not to my mother. It was not to Brooke. It was to a woman named Harriet Good, who had been a consumer fraud attorney in Guilford County for 27 years, and who had been recommended to me by a colleague at the station whose brother had gone through an identity theft case 2 years prior. I called her office at 7:45 on a Friday morning, which is before most law offices open, and I left a message on her voicemail that was exactly 45 seconds long. I told her my name, my profession, the approximate dollar figure, and the relationship to the parties involved. I said I was not calling because I was upset. I was calling because I needed to understand what had been done to me and what could be done about it. She called me back at 8:03. Harriet Good had a voice like a magistrate reading a sentence. Economical, no warmth wasted on preamble. She asked 3 questions before she said anything else. Did I have any signed documents bearing my name that I had actually signed myself? Yes, my own legitimate accounts. Did I have any documentation of the contested accounts, meaning statements, application copies, anything in writing? Not yet, but I knew where to get it. Had I spoken to the antagonists in writing? No, only by phone. She said, quote, 8. I asked why not the wedding. She said, quote 9. I told her I understood. She told me to gather the following in this order. Every credit application filed in my name, which I could request directly from each creditor as the account holder of record. Every vendor contract bearing my signature, which I could request under the same authority. A complete credit report from all 3 bureaus showing the full account history and open dates. And anything I could find showing my own whereabouts and financial history during the periods when the applications were submitted, because establishing that I was physically working in Winston-Salem while applications were being processed in Charlotte was part of the record she intended to build. She said one more thing before she let me go. She said, quote, 10. That sentence did something specific to me. It clarified the air. I spent the next 3 weeks doing what I am trained to do, which is work a problem in sequence without letting any one piece of it destabilize the whole process. On shift, I ran calls. Between shifts, I pulled documents. I have a filing system that I use for my own records. Color-coded tabs, organized by date and institution. By the end of week 2, I had a 2-inch binder that contained the full account history for every fraudulent account in my name, including the application dates, the mailing addresses used, and in 3 cases, scanned copies of the actual signature pages. My signature had been forged on every single one. My actual signature, the one I have been using since I was 17 years old, has a specific quirk in the way I form the letter C and the way the H in Atchison drops below the line. The signatures on those documents did not have either of those characteristics. They were close, but they were not mine. Harriet noticed it in the first 30 seconds of looking at them. She said, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 11, underscore, underscore. I said that was likely because there were several documents from legitimate accounts in my parents' files that my mother had asked me to sign years ago for various family-related administrative tasks, and she had copies of some of them. She nodded and wrote something down. The unexpected help came from a direction I had not anticipated. A woman named Sandra Fitch worked as a notary and administrative coordinator at the catering company that held the largest contract, the one for $1,100,000. Sandra had been with the company for 11 years. She had processed the paperwork on Brooke's wedding contract herself. About 10 days after I sent a formal written request to the catering company for a copy of the signed contract, Sandra called me directly. She said she had been thinking about something since she got the request. She told me that when my mother and the event coordinator had come in to sign the catering contract, my mother had presented what she said was a notarized power of attorney authorizing her to sign on behalf of Claire Atchison. Sandra said she had processed it because it looked correct, but after receiving my request, she had pulled her copy and looked at it again. The notary seal on that document, she said, was from a notary in Forsyth County. The seal number was visible. She had looked it up. The notary whose seal appeared on that power of attorney document had been deceased for 14 months before the document was signed. Sandra said quietly, quote, 12. I wrote down everything she said verbatim while she was still talking. I asked if she would be willing to provide a written statement. She said yes, and she said she had already consulted with her own attorney about what her obligations were, and she was prepared to cooperate fully. I asked her why she was doing this. She paused and then said, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 1, 3, underscore, underscore, underscore. I told Harriet about Sandra the next morning. Harriet was quiet for a moment, that was longer than her usual silences. Then she said, quote, 14? I said yes. She said, quote, 15. In the second week of April, my mother's attorney, a man named Gerald Ames, who had been handling my parents' personal legal matters for years, called Harriet's office with a settlement proposal. He proposed that my parents would accept full responsibility for the outstanding balances, make a formal repayment arrangement with each vendor, and work to have the accounts closed in my name and transferred or discharged in exchange for my agreement not to pursue civil or criminal action. I read the proposal in Harriet's office on a Tuesday afternoon. I set it back on the table. I said, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 16, underscore, underscore. Harriet looked at me. I said, quote, 17. Harriet said, quote, 18. I said I understood the process would be longer and more difficult than accepting the offer. She said, quote, 19. Then I pulled the county records, and I saw the date, and I had to sit down. The fraudulent power of attorney, the one bearing the dead notary's seal, was dated September 14th of 2021. 3 days before that date, I had received a text message from my mother asking me to please confirm my social security number so she could add me to an emergency contact form at her dental office. She said the HR system required it. I had sent it. I checked my messages. The text was still there. She had asked for my social security number 3 days before she signed a forged power of attorney using my identity. The HR form explanation had been manufactured specifically to obtain that number. She had not needed my address. She already had that from years of holiday mailings. She had not needed my salary. That was publicly searchable through county payroll records. The one piece she had been missing, the one piece she needed to open the credit accounts, was the 9-digit number, and she had called me and asked for it, and I had given it to her, because she was my mother. I need you to understand what that sequence of events actually meant. It was not opportunistic. It was not impulsive. She had planned the timeline. She had identified the specific gap in her information. She had constructed a cover story. And then she had called her daughter and asked her to fill in the blank. But here is what none of them knew. When I pulled the full credit history, I found something that Harriet and I had not expected. 2 of the credit card accounts that were listed under my name had been opened not in 2021, but in 2019. More than 2 years before Brooke's engagement. The balances on those 2 cards had been used for household expenses, a kitchen renovation at my parents' house, and what the statements described as travel and entertainment. Those cards had nothing to do with the wedding. They predated the wedding by more than 2 years. The attorney went very quiet. I watched him read the statements twice. She had done this before. The wedding had not been the beginning. It had been the expansion of something that was already in progress. The total fraudulent liability across all accounts, including the 2 that predated the wedding, came to $3,940,000. I sat in Harriet's office with that number in front of me and thought about Sandra Fitch's daughter. I thought about the text message still sitting in my phone with my 9 digits in it. I thought about the Sunday dinner in October with the fabric swatches and the folder with my name on the tab. I had 1 meeting left, and I had been waiting for it. I want to pause here for just a moment, because at this point, I had everything, every application, every statement, every forged signature, Sandra's written affidavit, the dead notary's seal, the text message from 2021, the 2 accounts from 2019. Harriet had organized it into a submission that was 63 pages long before the exhibit attachments. And I remember sitting in her office the evening before the hearing, and she looked at me across the table and said, "They are going to walk in tomorrow believing this is still a family matter that got out of hand." I said, "I know." She said, "Let them believe that for as long as possible." I said, "That is exactly what I intend to do." I had been in rooms before where I was the person everyone underestimated. I knew what that looked like from both sides. I knew how long it took for the expression to change. I was ready to wait. The County Civil Courthouse in Winston-Salem is a building that has absorbed a lot of human difficulty over the years and shows none of it on the outside. Pale stone, wide steps, the kind of architecture designed to remind you that whatever you are carrying inside is smaller than the institution receiving it. We pulled into the parking garage at 8:47 in the morning. I remember checking the time. I had worn my dark navy blazer over a plain white shirt. I had chosen it because it was what I wore to job interviews and licensing renewals, the kind of clothing that signals you understand the room without trying to dominate it. My shoes were flat and practical. I had slept 6 hours, which for me after a 48-hour rotation is almost generous. Harriet walked beside me without speaking. She had a rolling briefcase and the posture of someone who had walked into a lot of rooms like this one. The conference room assigned to the hearing was on the 3rd floor. It smelled like the particular combination of recycled air and old carpet that large institutional buildings produce. There was a long table, 8 chairs, a window that faced west and let in flat morning light, and a water pitcher in the center that nobody touched. The presiding officer was a civil court referee named Judge Ann Caldwell, who had been hearing fraud cases in Forsyth County for 14 years. She was already seated when we entered. She did not look up from her papers immediately. I noted that and found it reassuring. My mother and her attorney, Gerald Ames, were already at the table. My father was beside her, which I had not expected. He was wearing a sport coat I remembered from my high school graduation. Brooke was not there. That was a choice someone had made, and I noted it without deciding yet what it meant. My mother looked up when I walked in. Her expression did a specific thing. It started as something that might have been relief, the reflexive maternal response to seeing me in a room, and then it recalibrated into something more careful, more calculating. Her attorney leaned over and said something close to her ear. She nodded. Gerald Ames had a yellow legal pad in front of him and a manner that suggested he considered this proceeding a formality to be resolved by lunch. He set his pen down flat on the table after we were seated, the way people do when they have already decided where things are going. Judge Caldwell opened the session and summarized the matter for the record. Civil fraud complaint, identity theft, forgery, financial instrument fraud, the use of another party's identifying information without consent across 14 credit accounts and multiple vendor contracts. She read the amounts. Her voice did not change when she read the total figure. I appreciated that. Gerald Ames opened. He presented my parents' position as a family financial misunderstanding that had grown beyond its original intent. He used the word informally 4 times in 6 minutes. He said my parents had every intention of resolving the outstanding balances and that the matter was better suited to mediation than a formal proceeding. He said the word family the way people say it when they mean it as a category that should exempt certain behavior from scrutiny. I sat beside Harriet and kept my hands flat on the table and let him talk. My mother looked at me twice during his opening. I did not return either look. Not from anger. From discipline. There is a thing you learn in emergency medicine, which is that the moment you make eye contact in a certain kind of situation, you have transferred power you cannot get back. I was not interested in transferring anything. Ames finished. Judge Caldwell made a note. She asked Harriet if she was ready to present. Harriet said yes, and she said it the way she said most things, which was with exactly no additional syllables. Harriet laid out the timeline first, the dates of each account opening, the mailing addresses used, my documented employment records placing me in Forsyth County on every date an application was submitted in Charlotte. She spoke for 11 minutes without interruption. When she finished the timeline, she said she had exhibits to enter into the record. I opened the folder in front of me and put it on the table and pushed it toward the center. The folder contained the full 63-page submission, tabbed and indexed. Behind it, in a separate sleeve, were the signature comparison pages, each fraudulent signature beside an authenticated sample of my actual handwriting, prepared by a forensic documents examiner Harriet had retained in February. Behind that was Sandra Fitch's affidavit. Behind that was a certified record from the North Carolina Secretary of State, confirming the date of death of the notary whose seal appeared on the forged power of attorney. Behind that was a printed screenshot of the text message. Date stamped. My mother's name at the top. My social security number in my own reply, sent 3 days before the power of attorney was signed. I watched the room. Gerald Ames reached for the folder before Judge Caldwell did. He opened the first tab. He looked at the signature comparison page. He turned to the second tab. Something in his posture changed in a way that was small and very specific, a slight settling, like a building that has taken on weight it did not anticipate. He turned to the power of attorney exhibit. He found the notary certification page. He looked at the date of death certification beside it. He set the folder down. My father looked at Ames. Ames did not look back at him. My mother's hands, which had been folded on the table, moved. She separated them and placed them flat, one on each side of her water glass, and I watched her look at the folder, the way you look at something when you are deciding whether to keep the expression on your face or let it go. Judge Caldwell read for 4 minutes in complete silence. The building outside did whatever buildings do. A phone buzzed somewhere on the table. Nobody moved to answer it. Then Judge Caldwell looked at my mother directly and said, quote, 26. She looked at Ames. She said, quote, 27. Ames excused himself from the table. My parents followed him into the hall. They were gone for 6 minutes. When they came back, my mother's face had reorganized itself into something I had not seen on her before. It was not remorse exactly. It was the expression of someone who has been running a calculation and has arrived at the end of the numbers. Ames said his clients wished to discuss a revised position. Judge Caldwell said that was noted and that they would proceed with the full evidentiary record regardless. I looked at my mother then, just once. She was looking at the table. I said quietly, one sentence. I said, I gave you my social security number because you asked me to. She did not answer. My father looked at his hands. Judge Caldwell made several additional notes. She said, for the record, that the documentation presented established a clear pattern of identity fraud executed over a period of not less than 32 months, predating the events related to the wedding by more than 2 years, and that the forged power of attorney bearing a fraudulent notary seal represented a separate and significant criminal matter that she was obligated to refer to the district attorney's office. She said that last part without drama, just as a fact. The way I tell a patient what is going to happen next. The room was very quiet. Outside, through the window, I could hear traffic on the street below. I was in the courthouse bathroom for 60 seconds after the session was recessed. I ran cold water over my wrists, which is something I do after long calls when I need to reset. I looked at myself in the mirror above the sink. I looked the same as I had that morning. Same blazer, same flat shoes. I dried my hands on a paper towel and went back out. The civil judgment came down 19 days later. My parents were found liable for the full fraudulent amount. The court ordered a structured repayment plan against their property, including the Kernersville house, and a lien was placed against my father's landscaping business, pending valuation. Gerald Ames withdrew from representing them within a week of the judgment. The district attorney's office opened a criminal investigation 3 weeks after Judge Caldwell's referral. My mother was charged with identity theft, forgery of a legal instrument, and financial fraud. My father was charged as a co-conspirator. The cases were still moving through the system when I am telling you this, which is to say the legal part was not finished, but the question of what had happened and who had done it had been answered in a room with a water pitcher and flat morning light and a judge who read every page. Carter Wills, who had known nothing about any of it, divorced Brooke 14 months after the wedding. I do not know if the legal proceedings were part of what happened between them. I did not ask. Brooke called me on a Thursday evening in October, about 4 months after the judgment. I was between shifts. She called 3 times before I picked up. When I answered, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, I did not know. I said I believed her. She said, I should have. I said, yes. Neither of us said anything for a while. She said, I do not know how to fix this. I said, I know. I meant it as a response to what she had said. I also meant it as a statement about the general situation. We hung up without making any plans. I have not spoken to her since, which is not a permanent decision on my part, just the honest current state of things. Harriet sent me a handwritten note after the judgment. It said, steady work. 2 words on a note card. I put it in the front of the binder. I moved into a rental house in Clemens about 6 months after the hearing. It has a kitchen with a window above the sink and a backyard that gets good light in the mornings. I have been thinking about getting a dog, which is something I have been putting off for years on the grounds that my rotation schedule makes it impractical, and it is still impractical, but I am thinking about it more seriously now. My credit score, after all 14 fraudulent accounts were closed, disputed, and formally removed from my record, came back to 751, 8 points higher than where I started. My mother is awaiting sentencing. My father accepted a plea arrangement. I do not talk about them often, and when I do, I try to be accurate rather than descriptive. They made a series of decisions over 32 months. Those decisions had consequences. I still work the same unit. Marcus Webb retired in January of last year, and we had a small gathering at a diner in Kernersville where I told him, badly, that he had been a good supervisor and a better person than the word supervisor contains. He told me I was going to be fine, which was unnecessary because I already knew it, but I appreciated that he said it anyway. What I kept from the whole thing was a specific understanding I had not had going in. I had always believed that trust was something you extended once and then held until evidence removed it. What I understand now is that trust, real trust, the kind you build with someone over years, is not a belief. It is a daily choice. And the people who abused mine had been counting on the fact that I would keep choosing it automatically, the way you keep breathing, without deciding to. I do not do that anymore. With anyone. It is not cynicism. It is just accuracy. There is one more thing I have not told you yet. The blue ceramic mug. The one I bought myself the day I passed my paramedic boards. It is on the counter in the new kitchen, right next to the window. Every morning before shift, I fill it with coffee, and I stand at the window for a few minutes and look at the backyard. I am not thinking about any of this when I do it. I am just drinking my coffee. That is the honest end of the story. If you have been through something like this, I want to hear about it in the comments. Not the legal part, necessarily, just the part where you had to decide what to do with something you did not choose and could not return. And if you want to know what happened with the criminal case and what my mother said the one time we spoke after the sentencing, that is a different video. The story is not finished yet.